Welcome to Encounter Wargaming. I'm Jay, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make some quick and easy 40k ruined building. Sweet, so the very first thing to consider always when building terrains, especially when you're talking about a city fight environment where you need your models to be able to move between floors, you need to be able to see out windows, you need to be able to work as far as, true line of sight is concerned. I know that's less of a thing now in 40k. I mean, it's still true line of sight, but cover means very little these days. I know in 8th edition, but, at Hogtown 40k we play very what you see is what you get, and I like to build terrain as pragmatic as possible. So when you're building a set of ruins, you really want to make sure that the levels are big enough that they can fit guys. Make sure they're not too tall so that guys can actually move between levels. As well, you want to make sure windows and gun emplacements and viewpoints actually function as windows, gun emplacements, and viewpoints with your standard size, Imperial Guardsman or Space Marine model. So here I have Jim Bob. Jim Bob is the basic Space Marine that I use to sort of work all my 40k terrain pieces. I basically take this guy into consideration when I build all 40k terrain pieces. I've now recently added him to a 32mm base so that it being, sort of the new hotness and the new standard size, pretty much if he can function on any terrain piece, then I know that the terrain piece will pretty much work for any general 40k model, as far as infantry is concerned at least. So I'm just going to take my notepad here and basically draw a concept of the measurements that I want to use. Now, of course, I don't need to draw the entire building here. I'm just going to kind of draw the distance I think it should be between, say, the floor and the windows. Now I want the arched windows like this. Adds a nice little flair to it. That kind of idea. I'll zoom in a bit for you guys. So we're going to go for the arched window effect. Basically, I would also want to make sure, though, that when the Space Marine looks through the window, his entire body isn't shown. We want, at least up to his knees, maybe up to his waist, to be covered by a wall, and then him be able to shoot through the window. So, in order to figure out those proportions, here I've got my floor, whether that be the base of the terrain, or, first floor, second floor, or whatever. I'm going to measure the height of the Space Marine, so that his entire body is taken into consideration from floor to top of window. I want the entire Space Marine model to be seen. So I'm kind of looking at, he himself, including backpack, is about 1.25 inches tall, but he got a base too, so I probably want about 1.5 inches from the floor to the top of the window. So I'm going to put 1.5 inches. And then this distance, from there to there, I want to only be maybe waist high, maybe a little bit lower than waist high, maybe just so that a guardsman or a Tau Fire Warrior or some kind of smaller infantry model can actually fire out of the window. So to his waist, we're looking at about 5/8 of an inch to his crotch from the bottom of the base. I think I'd rather round it up to either 3/4 or 1/2 inch, or down to 1/2 inch. Why don't we go 3/4 just for appearance sake? And that'll tell me my spacing that I'm going to want to use between the window and the floor. So that taken into consideration, I also want to make sure I know the distance I need between stories. Now, generally, city fight buildings in the past, at least the plastic sets that Games Workshop sells, have been in 3-inch increments. So for ease of math, in this tutorial, I'm going to do them in 3-inch increments. So they can be used with 30k, 40k, and pretty much any other 28mm miniature game that you're going to play in a post-apocalyptic urban war zone. So let's get to drawing. Right, so here I have your standard piece of 5mm foam core. I've decided to use black just because I generally use black for all terrain pieces, just in case. This one we're going to be covering with all kinds of layers of, paint and stuff, so it doesn't matter what color it is, but just your basic 5mm foam core is going to be the basis for this. More or less, at this stage, I want to plan out how tall I want my building to be, and then I'm going to plan out all of the stories where the windows are going to go, basically draw a grid on this right now. So, I've decided, as I explained in the last scene, that I'm going to make the stories 3 inches tall. That's very easy to do here. Just mark along the side. So I've got my 12 on the bottom there, so I go to 9, 6, and 3. And then, of course, you have to take into consideration there's going to be a wall above the top story if you actually want to have a third story. So we're going to go the full foot. We're going to make it four stories. It's actually going to be 3 stories as far as floors, but you'll have a wall at least on the top. Now, we want to also take into consideration how wide we wanted our windows, which we didn't discuss in the last scene. So here I've got the width of a Space Marine shoulder to shoulder is about 1 inch. So you know what, that'll make our windows too square, so why don't we make them a little slimmer than that. We'll go to 3/4, since we're 3/4 off the floor. That actually makes things relatively symmetrical. So, between each window, I am going to want, let's say, 1 inch, just because it's a good easy math. Go to 3/4. Basically, I'm just going to draw out how many windows across I want this building to actually be.
The fire's still burning, just throw it on the wheels still turning, we got
windows, and then I leave 1 inch on the other side, the same as I did everywhere else. Cool. So my actual distance is 9 3/4 inches. I've figured out now. So I'm just going to, now that I know that's my 9 3/4 inches, I can draw another one just randomly up here. 9 3/4. Connect the two. Double check. Measure twice, cut once, I always say. Cool. And then I wanted it to be 12 inches tall. And then I've got the mark from my original measurements. And that should give me my square. So, at this point, I'm actually going to go along and I'm going to make all my marks the same way I did along the bottom here, all the way up for each floor, so 4 rows of them. And then basically just draw a grid. So let's do it.
stop fooling around. Well, I'm sorry I wasted your time. Well, I'm sorry you wasted mine.
Now that we have all the columns of where we want our windows to be up and down, we're not going to quite draw where we want our lines this way yet. We're going to have to start cutting first. Alright, so with a very sharp utility knife, this blade is brand new, I haven't used it yet for anything else. I'm just going to cut out my big square that I made, which was 9 3/4 inches by 12 inches. Cut the whole thing out as one big square.
My man, those were the days.
And there we go. That's going to be our building. So the reason I did it this way, and why I didn't draw the horizontal lines yet, is simply because when you're building sort of that L shape that you want your building to be, sometimes it's hard if you just cut random pieces to make sure that both sides are actually exactly the same height and line up properly. So that's why I told you guys just to cut out the whole building as one square. Now what we're going to do is just go from point to point. As long as you stick to your final cut ends at the corner or starts at the corner, at either opposite corners, then pretty much you'll know that the 2 long sides will be the same height. So I'm going to start the cut on this corner, and I'm going to finish the cut on this corner. And in between, you can do whatever the heck you want. So I'm just going to go nuts and make a crazy ass line. And there it is. Now I know for a fact that these 2 corners are going to line up perfectly. So the reason I asked you not to draw the horizontal lines yet is because our stories are going to be 3 stories tall, but our windows are only going to be 3/4 off the floor, right? So there's going to be quite a bit of gap between the top of the window and the bottom of the next window. So if I had drawn all the bottoms of the windows, this piece, all the windows would be upside down, right? This way, they're still all the same distance this way, vertically, but now I have the bottoms of both. The top of what was the top of this one is the bottom of this one. Does that make sense? So now I'm going to go along the bottoms of both, and I'm going to draw out my 3/4 inches where I want the bottom of the window to be.
We'll see all the sides just like that show you like on.
And go up as well, so I'm going to go 3/4 or 3 3/4 inches.
I'll be right behind. Oh.
And then 6 3/4 inches. And finally 9 3/4 inches. Like on this one, it's only going to be one window. Now that all our horizontal bottoms are done, we're going to need to figure out where our top points are also going to be of our windows. So I figured 1.5 inches from the floor. So that only makes our window 3/4 by 3/4, which isn't good enough for me. Now we have 3 inches of space, so why don't we make the entire window 1.5 inches tall? Now we can draw all the lines.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1.
Go. That's where our windows are going to be. Now we've decided to do the arched windows for these buildings, so I don't want to actually like sit here. Now the easiest way to draw an arch is to find a point in the center of that square and then draw a line, a curved line. You could use a little bit of a compass or some kind of algorithm or whatever the hell you can figure out. For me, it's much easier to just make a template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically, I'll just show you. I'm going to take my note card here that I drew my little measurement sketch on. Now that I don't need it anymore, I'm just going to take a square corner, and I know that my windows are 1.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to measure 1.5 inches up from the edge of the card. There we go. Draw that line. Now I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch in. Get my 2 points. You only need 2 points to make a straight line. Remember that, guys? Line your ruler up. Bam. That is the size of my window. So, now I just cut this out with my knife, same knife I've been using. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to fold it exactly in half. So take your time, get all the corners lined up, and fold it exactly in half. Now the easiest way to do it is to make sure your outside corners line up with each other. Like this corner lines up with that corner and vice versa, this one on this one. Make a nice good crease there. Now what I want to do with this half is draw out the shape of my window. There, it's a little better, right? So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to draw from the center point. Just kind of, actually, you know what? Since I know it's 1.5 inches, I'm going to find a spot 3/4 of the way up, halfway up, and that's where my arch is going to start. That makes sense to me. Perfect symmetry, right? Then just draw basically a curve from that point to that point. And you can be rough with it, but try and make it look as nice as you possibly can. And because you folded this in half, you will get two symmetrical sides. So just take my knife, cut along my pencil line. Bam. There's my archways. So this little template right here now will make my life a hell of a lot easier. Now that I know that this is where all my windows are going to go, it's going to be much easier for me to cut out my window shapes while these are still flat before I actually attach them together. So I have my grid drawn out where all my windows are going to go, and basically I'm just going to trace this guy into all those squares that I intended as windows.
Honey, honey, life is stews. I got ripped on my shoes. You didn't know what you were in for when you dragged me out onto that dance floor.
And now we've literally got the skeleton of a building. An important tip I should mention is make sure to save all of your window pieces. We're actually going to be using these later. So I like to put them in a Ziploc bag just for later, and I'm going to show you why we're going to need these in a minute. Before we go any further on this guy, we're going to need a base for him. So now that I've got my wall pieces cut out, I'm going to use the same piece of foam core that I cut the corner out of earlier, if you guys can see there. Same piece of foam core. Basically, I'm just going to lay down my piece and see how big I would like to make my base. So because it's so tall, I think I wanted a couple inches further out this way and that way from the walls. So basically, I'm just going to do that and decide that I want it to kind of come to there. Obviously I'm going to round off this edge roughly. And then same the other way, I want it to kind of come to there-ish. And then just connect the dots.
A round hole.
It is important to mention that when you're cutting, make sure you don't put your blade completely straight. When we were cutting the windows, we wanted it completely perpendicular with the board. This time, we actually want to come in at a bit of an angle. And that way it'll actually taper the edges of this foam core at the same time as giving us the shape that we desire.
Do not wait in line, 'cause I'm letting you know.
And there's our base. Quick and easy. So now that I've got my building laid out, I just realized that I didn't actually draw lines for where I want the floors to be. I did draw lines for where I want the windows to be, and I do know that I wanted the windows 3/4 above where the floor was. So basically the bottom line should be already good. All I'm gonna do is go across and measure 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of every window and then draw a line just like we did when we were originally drawing them.
Whoa, darling.
It's probably important to note to make sure that you dry fit your two pieces first so that you know which two sides are actually going to be on the inside of the building so you're not drawing your lines on the wrong side. So let's keep going.
No one night stands. Oh, well, baby, if that's not what you want.
I want to make sure that also when I do glue these two walls together that I actually, when I'm putting it down on my base, that it is a square and not like in like this, out like that, whatever. So one of my pieces is pretty close to square. The other one I don't entirely trust only because I measured it. I didn't actually like it wasn't manufactured, whereas this corner was actually manufactured. So I'm going to use this as my guide. And I kind of want the corner of my building to be there. So I'm just going to draw a line this way. And again, guys, like this corner is a little bit bent and it's a little bit crooked. Like this is just a guideline. Doesn't have to be like 100% perfect. It is a ruined building after all. As long as you relatively stick to a right angle, you should be good as far as pragmatism and appearance. Oh, that should be good enough. Now I've had my hot glue gun heating up off camera since I started drawing out these floors, and I'm just gonna go around and glue these guys together. So the very first thing, I'm actually gonna glue them to each other. Lined up at the bottom, lined up at the top, and make sure that they, see that it's way off. Make sure you have a little bit of time to move around the hot glue. Make sure that they're flush, or at least close to flush on the outside here. And you just use your thumbs to push this one until it hits the edge of the other one. Use my finger to wipe off the hot glue as it dries. Bam. Nice. And you will get a lot of squeeze out in the middle. You can just run your finger up while it's still wet. And no problem. Now, luckily we drew our square edge on the template before we started doing this, so now I just have to put some glue along the bottom of this and then square it up with those lines. Literally just place it inside my pencil marks.
Oh, yeah.
And just make sure that it's on my pencil line. And like I say, you have a little bit of time to move it around, but not a lot. Push it down real firm. And bam! We've got a ruined building. So now I've got to figure out my floor pieces. And this is just as simple, now that we've got it together, as measuring how big they basically are going to be. So, the great news about a ruler, even though it's usually a pain in the ass, it's actually a good thing in this case. There's this little extra 1/8 of an inch from where the actual plastic of the ruler ends to where the measurements start, and that will actually give me a little bit of space if I am to measure these distances, so that the floor is not sticking out past the wall. I want it to be in further from the wall, and that will always guarantee me that little, like, I guess it's not quite an 1/8, more of a fat 1/16. So that means I can just literally butt it up against the wall like this and go make this floor, we'll say 4 5/8.
Stop with laughter, laughing the way I walk, way I'm talking to myself. Everybody sing this song, I'm gonna sing. That boy is out of his mind.
So those are my measurements. Now I'm going to go back to my foam core and I'm going to cut basically triangles where two of the sides of the right angle are these measurements. So working with the straight corner I've been given by the actual board itself when it was manufactured, and this next corner that I made, it's okay that it's not exactly square, but the manufactured side should give you a perfect angle, and then the other side should be pretty damn close. I mean, at this point we're just doing the inside of the building, so it's not as important, but it is still important that it's relatively square. So I've got my measurements here, and I'm looking at one being 6 3/8. Do I have enough of this to do it? I do.
They got me right now when they'll say that boy is out of his mind.
Just go crazy, just like at the beginning, and make some crazy crooked line. Just make sure you end where your mark is. Boom. That's our bottom, well, that's our second floor. I'm gonna put, yeah, count from the bottom up, right? Even though on the thing here I put 1 2 3, I'm gonna put this one as second floor. For my own brain. Next manufactured corner.
At least I have a good time.
Now I got my floor pieces, I got my glue gun, I got my lines drawn out where I want my floor to be. It's just a simple matter of gluing them on. Same way we did put the walls together. Put a thick bead on both edges, and I want to make sure that I get the top edge of my floor lined up with my pencil line, because that's where I want the bottom of the model's bases to be, on that line, which will be the top edge of the floor. So the bottom edge, I mean, the fact that it's 5 millimeters, it will take 5 millimeters off the 3-inch difference, but that means there will actually still be exactly 3 inches from top to the floor to the other top of the floor. and it'll give us the 3/4 inches to the bottom of the windows as we wanted. So I'm actually just gonna play around with Billy Bob here and put him up here on the window and just make sure that he can just see out. Beauty. So let's keep it going.
Now I'm gone. When I tie up one loose end, another comes undone again.
There you go. We got 3 stories, perfect for a Space Marine model. So that'll work for pretty much any 40k game, any Necron or even Ogryn or, you know, Imperial Guardsman. From the outside, you can just see perfectly out. Love it. So, now that we've got the basic skeleton of the building done, we can start adding details. So the first external detail I want to tend to are these windows. The outside of this building just looks way too plain at this point. I mean, it literally looks like a piece of foam core that I cut some holes into. And it's always going to look like that when you know what it is, but at the same time, by just adding some minor details, we can really add a huge element of realism to this piece without actually breaking our backs. So, you know how I told you to hold on to all of the window pieces? Make sure you have all of the pieces that you cut out of those windows, because we're going to need to create window sills, and the easiest way to keep with the width without me going back and cutting further strips, further squares, whatever, we might as well use the material that we've already used as to not waste further material. Plus, it's already cut at the width of a window, right? So all I'm going to do now is go through all these pieces and just measure out, say, 1/4 inch. We don't need much. So I think 1/4 inch will do it. There. There. Just draw a little line with my ruler. And cut them with my knife. And there's my windowsill. Now I'm just going to take that a little bit of my hot glue. Put a little tiny bit on the back. And stick it right underneath my window, trying to get as flush with the bottom of the window as I possibly can. And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just do all of these. There's no point in you watching me do that, and we'll take a look at it when it's done. And there's all our windowsills. So the last detail I'd like to add to this / cover up is this crazy seam right down here, because I don't really like the look of that. And even though we are going to put textured paint and then layers of paint and other sand and things like that on top of this, which will kind of fill that a little bit, it won't exactly cover that. So we're going to create a little something to hide that. So once again, I've got my foam core, and I know that the height of my building is 12 inches. So I'm going to measure from here. Actually, let's square this off first. I don't need to make it a perfect square because I just need a flat edge, and this curvy edge is just not going to work for me. There we go. Save that for another terrain project in the future. So, now that I've got this, I know that my building is 12 inches tall. So I can just measure 12 inches. Don't have to go too far in, because I only need a couple of thin strips for this. So there's my 12 inches on the other side. Want to create a parallel line to the other flat side I just cut, and then grab my building, here it is, and figure out exactly how far in I want to make this. So from the edge, so I got 5mm foam core that's just less than 1/4 inch. So if I make this guy a 1/2 inch, should go a little more than that. Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to go a 1/2 inch because I don't want to impede too much into the windowsill. I do want to have some space between it. So, we're going to go 1/2 inch.
You're the king of the barber.
too, guys, if you do cut these strips out and your cut lines are not perfect, it's totally okay. This is a ruined building, remember. Cutting those strips was to hide this horrible seam here. So we don't want to put these on and then find out that we just have a brand new seam to cover up after all. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pick the worst sides of this, the sides that I don't like to cut, because the flatter side I want to still be seen. These ones, I'm just going to be very careful, and I'm going to bevel the edge on them. So this one's almost already partially beveled already. So I'm going to look down at it, see if I can get a good angle for you guys, and give it sort of a 45-degree angle. Now, I'm not going to worry if I cut too far in like that. Yeah, I'll try and do this. I'm not going to worry if I cut too far in like that as much, because if there's empty space inside, that's fine. If I cut too far out, then it's not going to be any good, because they'll butt up against each other and I'll have a big space here. So I just want to try and get a 45 going, go slow. Try not to cut yourself, and I want to make sure that I'm cutting through basically from this outside corner in as far as I think. Basically, if you look at this side, if you're going as far in as the board is thick, you've pretty much got a pretty good 45. And you want to make sure that when you do your cut, that you don't cut into this piece of Bristol board on the outside at all. You can cut all the crookedness you want on the inside here, but make sure to avoid cutting into this outside one, because that's going to be our nice outside corner. So let's go at it.
The fire's still burning. We built the wheel's still turning. Our brains are frozen and nothing seems to change.
And there we go. So all I'm going to do now is run a nice bead, a nice thick bead of hot glue all the way down here. Right down the center. I want to make sure I get lots on there. Just simply because I'm not really sure how much of the inside of my strips is going to actually stick, since I took off most of the surface area on the inside and tried to maintain the surface area on the outside. I'm going to put it basically right down the middle of where I think my thing's going to be, and then I'm going to put a nice thick bead down the edge, the very corner of my terrain piece as well, because this will fill in behind my sharp corner on my strips. And put the first one in place. Try and make it quick here, because I need to put the other one on very quickly.
Just broke down, torn down, useless old clown.
And while the glue is still wet, I want to make sure I push my mitered corners into each other as much as I can. Hold them as tight as I can. And if I have to, I can squeeze some glue in after. But I want to make sure that I hold them as tight as possible.
Of our stupid lives.
And there we go. Nice corner on our building. Now, this is a little rough, but remember, we are going to be covering this in battle damage and other things like that. So right now, if you do find some areas look pretty bad, you can actually just take your X-Acto knife and just shave it off a little bit. You can even take some sandpaper to it if you want and just sand the corner a little bit. That'll just smooth it out a little bit more. But like I say, I'm going to be doing a lot more to this, so I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And we're going to move on to the next stage. So the next step for our building is battle damage. Now this is where we really get to sort of give it some personality. Also, we can use this stage to fix a lot of the mistakes we've made. Like, if you can see here, these two windows, though they're very close, they're not consistent, and both sides are not symmetrical. Even though I used my template, it was still made out of paper, so there was room for error. But this stage actually allows you to fix these kinds of errors, just simply by taking your sharp knife and causing some triangular shaped cuts. Well, sometimes it bunches like that too. Depends on how sharp your knife is. Do that. trying to stick to sort of triangle shapes, and that sort of creates the illusion that it's been blown out, okay? Now you can get as detailed or as simple as you really want with it. It's really just up to you how much time you're willing to spend. That's probably good enough for this guy. So there you go, that's been blown out. And basically I'm just gonna go around on the corners as well. So like right here, where my two mitered edges didn't really line up properly, or actually this is a better one to show you. It's kind of got a hole there. I want that to actually look like a hole. So what I can do is I can actually take my knife and just kind of twist it in the hole and widen it up. Also, because this paper's peeling off here, I can just take it and sort of shave, again, sort of triangular patterns into the edges. And I can do that in a few different spots. Kind of chop up, chop down, do that kind of thing. And then you can even just pry it out, and a lot of the times that'll create a rough rip, just like that. That's actually good, believe it or not. Looks like a mess up, but this is the point where you get to cover all of your mistakes. Give it one more right there. Cool. And then also, I'm going to do the same thing on the window ledges. Just kind of cut them in a bit like that. And don't be afraid to sort of do like a ripping action as well, because you'll rip the paper, you'll rip the foam, and that's actually what you want, because you want it to look as organic as possible, I suppose.
Well, I'm sorry I wasted your time. Well, I'm sorry you wasted mine. Procrastinating is so easy, 'cause it's little things that really please me. Time makes it so hard to change, but I'm ending every story well. But man, those were the days.
Make sure, though, that you don't forget about the levels up top, either. Make sure to take damage out of all the floors, every wall, and make sure to cover both sides.
Well, I'm sorry you wasted mine. Maybe we'll write it. Well, 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 maybe we'll write it. Don't rub it in.
Right, so I'm going to clean up my workbench a little bit, and then we'll go on to the next stage. Excellent, so now that all our battle damage is done, we're going to do what's called textured paint. Now, this isn't technically a paint, but we're going to paint it on. And more or less, it's just PVA glue and sand. Now, here I've actually got a mixture of some fine sand and some ballast. What I would suggest for this is to use fine sand, nothing with large gravel pieces in it, because, I mean, it's not going to kill it if you do, but we don't want large rocks on the walls. We want the walls to look like they sort of have the texture of concrete. Now, I've got a disposable cup here. I usually use plastic, but in this case, all I have in the house is styrofoam, so it's going to have to be styrofoam. And I don't need that much, because even though I am painting the entire thing, it's going to go pretty far. So I've got a good dollop of glue in there. Enough that I think it would be able to cover the entire piece. And then I'm just going to take a good helping of my sand ballast mixture, or in your case, hopefully you're just using fine sand, and add, I don't know, maybe the equivalent of a third of the amount of glue I used, or even less. You don't need that much, but I like to be heavy with it, because we want this, oh, I should start in front of the camera. We want this to sort of turn into a nice, like I say, a concrete texture. That's looking pretty good already, actually. Perfect. Now we don't want it to be too thick, but at the same time we want it to be thick enough that it's not going to just run off the entire piece. We want it to actually stay on the surface. So this is actually pretty good, I think. That was pretty good for a first try. I don't have to adjust it that much. And I'm just going to take my building and literally paint it on. It ain't rocket surgery, just painting it on. I'm going to make sure to cover the entire thing, and I especially want to make sure that I get up into these holes because we're going to paint this next. And normally I would spray paint it, which I'm probably not going to do in this case because it's actually winter time right now. I don't really want to go out and spray it, so I'm probably going to paint it with brown paint with a brush. But normally I would spray paint it, and so I would definitely recommend you cover any areas of the foam with this white glue sand mixture. Mainly because the white glue will protect it. And even if you are painting on with a brush, I would suggest protecting it anyway. So go for it. Also, especially on these windowsills. So yeah, let's get to her.
They're killing the muse, and they're killing the music.
Now you're gonna find as you're painting it, it's gonna start to get really floppy, and that's because the Bristol board's starting to get wet, and just like paper does when it gets wet, it starts to deteriorate. So you want to be real careful not to push too hard, but just go around now that you've painted the entire piece and just try and find anywhere where there's too much globs, too much pooling, that kind of stuff, and just smooth it out, especially on like the windowsills and where you've pushed through to try and get like up around the arch and stuff like that. You'll find you'll get squeeze out on the opposite side of wherever it was you were trying to push through. So just go around and make sure there's no big globby nastiness that's going to destroy the detail that you tried to create with your battle damage, but at the same time hide some of the accidental damage that you did with your battle damage. And there it is. So we're just going to leave that overnight to dry. Sweet, so our textured paint is all dry, and before I go ahead and put sand down on the base of my piece, I want to actually add some more details to this. So I've got here a couple of containers of the Gale Force 9 basing slate. It's just like some random broken up pieces of slate, and in fact the larger ones here you can actually take and break up yourself. They actually break very easily by hand. So I'm just going to break a bunch of those up, glue them all around here, especially along the back here where these walls have like crumbled. I want to add more debris and things like that. Not as much on the front. I may add a few on the front, but I mainly want to add them along the back here. But I don't want to add too many that we're not going to be able to place models on this in the future. So more or less I've just got a smaller container of white glue as opposed to the big one that you saw me using before. And I'm just going to kind of go around and just put a bunch everywhere, kind of where I want the rubble to be. Not too complicated. And then just take all my little pieces and start randomly scattering them around. Now you're going to want to lean them up against each other a little bit. Oh, you couldn't actually see that very well there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take like a big one like this, place it down, and then I want to take the other ones, oops, and I want to take the other ones and just kind of lean them up against it like that, so that it creates kind of a rough pile of concrete. And we could have used smaller pieces of foam core that we cut off the wall parts, but this stuff's a lot more durable, and when you put foam core in small pieces around like that, it tends to break and stuff in the future, because like I say, we're going to be placing models on top of this, and we don't want it. We want to make it as durable as possible. We don't want it to break and chip and what have you. So I like using this stuff. It's a little expensive as far as the quantity you get for the price, but it'll be much better than pieces of foam core scattered around. Plus, it saves me having to seal them in with glue the same way I sealed the walls in with glue. So I'm just kind of haphazardly going around, kind of sprinkling little bits of this crap everywhere.
She says she's a mystery.
There we go. So I'm going to let that dry, and then once that glue is dry, I'm going to put another layer of glue down and just sprinkle my playground sand on top. So I've got some paper laid out here just to catch all the loose sand as I shake it off, just so I don't waste it, and that way I can reuse whatever doesn't stick. So more or less I'm just taking my PVA glue and painting it on. It's not rocket science, just kind of getting it on there pretty much everywhere on the base, even on the rocks. I don't want to get it too much on top of the rocks, but I do want to make sure it gets everywhere, it gets in between. It's okay if some of it gets onto the rocks, because of course this is a war-torn battlefield. Clearly this building blew up a long time ago, so it's not like, you know, these pieces of concrete wouldn't be buried underneath weather and mud and sand and what have you. So as you can see here, I'm just covering the entire base in glue, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that.
All other projects are on hold. Alright. No, darling.
As you guys saw in fast motion there, basically when I did the first half, I'm going to do it slower for you this time. Basically, now that I've got my PVA glue all over the base, I'm just going to dump my sand out of my tub onto the piece. I want to try and dump it closer to the edges, because that way I can just sort of tap it into the center and make sure that the edges get lots of sand on them. I want to tap it just towards the walls now, just like this. If a little bit doesn't get on, that's okay. What I can do is just go back over it again with my tub of sand, just like that. And tap off all the stuff that didn't stick to the glue. And then basically the reason I have this paper here, like I said, is so that I can just collect all the stuff that didn't stick, and then just take it and funnel it back into my tub. And then all this sand doesn't go to waste. I can actually still use it for future projects. Here, I'll move it closer into the camera so you guys can actually see what the hell I'm doing. There we go. Now, normally I would suggest using a much larger piece of paper. Usually I use a parchment paper, parcel paper for this. Today I'm just using some print-offs that didn't print very well, and so I figured, why waste the paper? And here we go. Just making sure to collect it all back up. Also, this way you don't make a massive mess of whatever room you're doing this on. If you're doing this on your mother's kitchen table, she'll be appreciative that you didn't leave a massive mess of sand everywhere. So that's it, guys. That is our piece. There it is. That's our ruined building. Pretty sweet, right? So obviously it's not painted yet. Basically today I just wanted to show you guys how to build it. Some very simple techniques that you can use to make this thing look awesome. So right now I think it's looking pretty sweet. It's going to look even better when we paint it. So tune in next week where I'm going to show you how I'm going to paint this thing. We're going to do weathering, we're going to do grass, we're going to do vines, we're going to do the concrete, the dirt, everything. We're going to make it look wicked awesome. So tune in for that next week, a week from today. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Please, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. It goes a long way to help us here, help our stats, and so on and so forth. Also, if you really like these terrain tutorials, if you like our battle reports, if you like our campaigns, if you like everything else that we do on this channel, please go down to the description below. Check out our Patreon link. For as little as $1 a video, or hell, even $1 a month if you really want to, you get a whole bunch more video content. You get access to our video content earlier than everybody else that is watching it on YouTube. as well. There are extra bonuses for being involved, and it's all on the page, so go down and check that out, and we'll see you at our next one.
Like a monkey in a rocket on his way back home. Okay.